so bad at representing other cultures?
Well, I don't particularly care. Mostly. But why are you, Jamin, so bad at representing gamers or common sense? Though maybe the deeper question I should be asking here is, why exactly do you feel like games have an obligation to represent cultures in a certain way at all? Why can't you, Jamin, understand that developers should be left to making the content that they want to make? That the creators should not be stifled in this way, especially for the reasons of it might damage someone's fragile feelings. Normally, when the reason for canceling something or changing something is because it could hurt someone's feelings, I don't consider that much of a valid argument. Feelings, you see, are fleeting. They are like the wind. They flit and flutter and drift about. You can't nail them down. You can't identify them. Feelings only mean one thing to the person feeling them, and to nobody else. I suppose when someone says they feel a certain way, you have to, well, listen and believe.
Video game designers have learned how to make even the most foreign worlds feel grounded. No matter how many monsters or how much magic there is in a virtual world, players can quickly assimilate foreign environmental details and their characters' traits. Yet, a huge problem remains in the medium's treatment of actual, in real life, foreign locations.
We'll come back to the thoughts later. Let's look at the imagery he uses here. This is a game called The Elder Scrolls, Skyrim. It's about collecting potions. As most of you are probably aware, Skyrim, in a large part, takes all of its cultural influences, the buildings, the words, the accents that people use in the game, a dragonborn, hang. It all comes based from Nordic cultures and their mythologies. This culture is, for the most part, non-existent within reality. The Norse, the Vikings, those peoples, while they exist today, their culture has shifted. It's different. For the most part, the representations of that culture in this game are entirely up to the imagination and the creative freedom of Bethesda when they made this game. However, they use that culture as the groundwork to frame Skyrim. Everything comes together in one cultural sort of identity for the most part. You know, the Nords and the Stormcloaks and the nationalism that comes from the rebellion and their uprising against the Empire. It ties it all together. It allows us to be grounded, even though there are dragons and magic and crabs the sizes of dogs. Let's take a look at the next game. So we have Bioshock Infinite, which takes place in the city of Columbia, floating high in the sky. Colombia, in the culture of the Colombians, is an ultra-nationalist, constitutional, and ultra-conservative, ultra-right-wing, ultra-religious society that doesn't exist in the West anymore today. It forms the basis for the foundation of a society in which you play in that you can relate to because it does have similarities, albeit these are extremely hyperbolic, to what we see today. Everyone is extremely racist against blacks and the Irish, and they're very distrustful of foreigners. An almost theocratic society that is led by a prophet who speaks on behalf of a god. Even the banner you see here harkens to manifest destiny. It is our holy duty to guard against the foreign hordes. It is a corruption of the idea of this ultra-conservative, libertarian sort of movement. What I think is very interesting, Jamin, about this representation that you show here is that you don't seem to have a problem with this game's depiction of what is obviously hyperbolic right-wingers, because what it parodies, basically, is something that you yourself, I would guess, find reprehensible, knowing that you're so far left yourself. If this game took place in a society that was a hyperbolic parody of the ultra-left-wing, for instance, then perhaps, maybe this would be in a segment later on in the video where you criticize it for not, well, respecting that kind of cultural idea properly. This is, of course, completely theoretical, but I think I would be spot on in that regard. So let's move on to the next one. Prince of Persia from 2008. I never played this game, and I haven't really played any of the Prince of Persias, but it's pretty obvious where the cultural influence comes from, so I won't waste your time any further with that, because I'm certain that they get it all so correct.
Otherwise known as cultural appropriation.
Now, I don't think cultural appropriation is for all intents and purposes real. I believe that it is Well, I think it's a boogeyman. It's a ghost in the shadows. It's a story you tell snowflakes to keep them gaping and afraid, to make them think that they're victims, to make them think they're being oppressed. Something for people to look at, if they can even identify it, and say, this is an ill in society. Aren't I a good person for pointing it out? By the way, donate to my Patreon. How am I supposed to fight the evil people if you don't pay me every month?
Cultural appropriation happens when one, usually dominant group or culture, like Caucasians or Americans, exploit or borrow elements of another, usually oppressed culture, without a lot of consideration or input.
Well, you see, Jamin, that's because their input or their consideration is not a prerequisite for using parts of their culture. And when I say their culture, I use that in the most open, ubiquitous sense of the word. Who does culture belong to? Which Japanese person owns Japanese culture? Is it the government that owns it? Is it everyone collectively? No one has a right to it. No one is, who owns it? Can you disavow that ownership? Can you decide you're not going to be an authority on it? Who speaks for Japanese culture? To whom must you go to in order to have your representation of another culture official or sanctioned? Or is this just another victimless crime? Culture is the art and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. No one man owns the sky, after all. Cultural appropriation by Wikipedia is the adoption or use of the elements of one culture by members of another culture. In this light, it is not necessarily negative in connotation. We can see this happening naturally all the time. Cultures merge and mingle and mix, and they create different cultures. They create different ways of life. This is a natural result of people with different cultures living together, especially nowadays in a world where you can talk to people across the planet, where you can go from one country to another with really relative ease. Cultural appropriation in this sense of the word is just natural. It just happens. It's what people do. People see things they like of cultures that they weren't born into, and they say, hey, that looks nifty, that looks neat, I like that. Let me take some of that and add it to something I'm creating, or emulate it in some way because I admire it. Imitation is, after all, the sincerest form of flattery, Jamin, is it not? And quite frankly, who cares if they get it a little wrong? Who cares if they don't adopt it perfectly? Who cares if they just take the bits and parts that they like and add it to what they think and what their preferences are? Some cultures are actually pretty shitty. I'm not one of those, fools who thinks that all cultures are the same and they are all of equal standing. Some cultures are shit. Theocracies, female genital mutilation, homophobia, some of these things are rampant and, hell, commanded in some cultures. So don't come to me with the garbage of, oh, it's just different. Yeah, it's just different and horrible. Perhaps it's easy to say some cultures become better because when people look at it, they can separate the good things from the not so good things and adopt what is good. People's tastes and sensibilities are semi-permeable, as are their cultural norms. This is a positive and negative I'm getting too long-winded. Let's get back to this thing here. I read articles before this video while I was sick over the last week or so in order to train my mind about cultural appropriation and understand the point of view of people who believe it's just the worst thing since ever always. Like, worse than Starship Troopers 3, worse than The Phantom Menace, worse than a 12-year-old getting Dark Souls for their birthday. This on alternet.com. See, it's like internet, but alternet's different. How to explain cultural appropriation to anyone who just doesn't get it. And bravo to Kovi Biacolo. You have explained it to me even more, and now I hate it twice as much. In the article, it says, cultural appropriation involves the use of one's culture elements by a group or individual who does not belong to that culture. I think that's such interesting wording, though. An individual who does not belong to that culture. I thought cultures belong to, or do people belong to, However, this definition is lacking because such an interaction may be labeled simply as cultural exchange. I mean, the author really wants people to have a problem with this, and it's a problem if other people don't have a problem with it. But it continues, and this is very, very important to the entire crux of the idea of cultural appropriation being literally worse than Hitler's remaining testicle. And that argument would be difficult to defeat because first, Who owns a culture? This is central to the argument, or at least one of them, against cultural appropriation. Who owns a culture? Who does it belong to? Who has the rights to it? Who is the person who has the say in what is or isn't proper culture? Who do you go to as the authority on Japanese culture, or Indian culture, or Bosnian Herzegovinian culture? The paragraph goes on to say, and second, borrowing from one culture and lending to another has been the way of the world since human society began. All of a sudden now, it's just awful. It's terrible now. It's been awful now. The culture that everyone lives in is because of cultural appropriation. Pretty much no matter who you are, the reason that your culture is the way it is because the people who came before you, and the people who came before them, and the people who came before them had their cultures merging together and influencing with one another, and way back in the day, it wasn't as obvious as it was now. The restrictions on travel and education, languages, people's ability to communicate globally, but now we see cultures mixing all the time. I digress, though. We can see this effect in real life in obvious ways. America and Mexico border each other, and there's a lot of influx between these two cultures hitting it off with one another, and then, bam, you get Tex-Mex. It's just a natural progression of two cultures existing besides one another. But let's rigmarole ourselves back to the original idea. Jamin Warren saying dominant cultures. A dominant culture changes on where you are. In Japan, Japanese culture is dominant. In America, American culture is dominant. And even then, when we talk about American culture, Lord knows what that is. It's all sorts of things to all sorts of people, and it changes depending where you go. You have all sorts of different cultures that are combining and mixing in different ways. That's why I live in the middle of Arkansas, and my culture around me might be different than someone living in, I don't know, northern Minnesota, or maybe downtown San Francisco. And by dominant, I assume, everything I just said is assuming when he says dominant, he means the most popular culture that prevails in a given area. That's why the Japanese culture is prevalent in the Japan land, and in the America place, we have the America culture being dominant. But really, which one is better than another? While no two cultures are equal, people might consider one better than another. So really, when you say dominant culture, you're saying one is regarded as better than another, or it's more popular because more people follow that culture. There has to be some metric that we're using to judge which one is more dominant. So if you, Jamin, thinking that American culture is dominant or Western culture is dominant, take that idea into downtown Baghdad and tell me how that works out for you. Hell, tell a woman to go to Saudi Arabia with the idea in her head that American culture is dominant and see how long it takes for her to lose her head. Look, I'm not going to be really salty about it, but the reason I don't have a foreskin right now is because, well, I wasn't exactly asked about the matter. There you go, dominant culture. I do think dicks look better with a little bit of trimming, but that's just me. Jamin also brings up a dominant culture like Caucasian culture. Jamin, Caucasians, and I know you mean white people here, white people don't have a culture. It's not a monolith. French culture, Swedish culture, German culture, British culture, American culture, if you could even call American culture white-centric, and I don't think it is, those are all different things. Canadian culture is different than Russian culture, but they're all white. You're clearly saying here that white people's culture is dominant. Yeah, in those places where whites are prevalently the majority group, and there's most of them, so they have the bigger sway on the media and what goes on around them. But it's ridiculous for you to say that, oh, white culture is dominant culture. I've never been overseas myself yet, but I would imagine if I went to China, that might not be the case. As he's talking about this, he has gameplay in the back, the first one being of Resident Evil 5. He also has footage of Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 is a masterpiece of a game, I think, and Resident Evil 5 is pretty decent, and it is worth taking a look at. But both of these games have at least a few things in common. One of this is that in terms of the story, you have a white protagonist going to a foreign land that he is not familiar with or from, and killing the bad guys and either stopping a plot to destroy the world or rescuing the girl, or both. Now, none of these games, I've played them so much, none of these games to me ever scream that white people are better than other people, or that American Western culture is better than these other cultures because, one, Resident Evil 4 takes place in Spain, and Spain is in the West, and da-da-da. These games have nothing to do with race. It's a ridiculous idea that Jamin is trying to persuade you into thinking here by having this footage rolling in the background when he's talking about dominant cultures, making fun of marginalized, oppressed cultures. Because when I see Spanish culture, I don't think these are oppressed culture. How are the Spaniards being oppressed right now? And I certainly don't think, how are the Africans in Africa being oppressed by the white man? Especially when the co-stars seem to be minority women. Now, Jamin has said in the past that Resident Evil 5 is really, really super racist because, God forbid, you go to Africa and there's black people everywhere. It's like when you go to Spain, there's a bunch of Spaniards. Imagine that. But let's continue.
This cultural insensitivity is an issue for a lot of games set on foreign soil, in particular war games.
Alright, we're going to take a quick detour. This is one of the images that he showed. This is from Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, released in 1987 by Nintendo. You will notice that the champion is Piston Honda. He's 26-1 and has 18 KOs. Obviously, he's a very, very, very good boxer. Now, he is saying Sushi, Kamikaze, Fujiyama, Nippon, Ichi. Now, isn't that very, very insensitive for them to portray a Japanese person like that? And then you stop for a moment, and you think about it, and then you roll the credits, and of course it's made by a bunch of Japanese people, because Nintendo's a Japanese company, and this game was made in 1987. And then when you take into account it's made by Japanese people, and the Japanese people who made this game are poking fun at themselves, and then you look at the other cast of characters, like the big Russian whose name is Soda Popinski. Again, Soda Popinski. And then you have the stereotypical Indian, whose name is Great Tiger, who has a fucking tiger with him. And then we have another character, the German, named Von Kaiser, and the Frenchman named Glass Joe. And we, of course, have Don Flamenco, a handsome Latino with a rose in his mouth who dances to a rendition of Bizet's Carmen. Hell, I found this article on Huffington Post, which is just a terrible place, never go there, by Brandon Mendelson. Nintendo said, "Screw you, America, we're going to teach little white boys and girls to beat up people who are different from them." Oh, because yes, Brandon, that's definitely what Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Is teaching little white boys and girls to do. Just go out and beat up people from other countries, you fucking idiot. The Japanese developers of Punch-Out!, they stereotyped everybody, even the protagonist, the little up-and-coming boxer from the Bronx. Everyone's stereotyped. That was the idea, is to be exaggerating with all these characteristics of people and their cultures. And if you have a problem with that, holy fuck, grow up.
In 2013, Call of Duty set part of its campaign and multiplayer map in Karachi, Pakistan. Despite all the hours Sledgehammer Games spent perfecting every piece of rubble or destroyed bus, they missed one key detail. Pakistan's two official languages are Urdu and English, yet every street sign and every piece of dialogue that they recorded for the Karachi map was in Arabic.
And despite all the hours you, Jamin, spent perfecting every word in the script, and your supporting members spent getting all the gamer-friendly nerd gear behind you in place, and all the video footage in this abomination of an upload of yours, you missed one key detail. Modern Warfare 2 was developed by Infinity Ward in 2009, not Sledgehammer Games in 2013. Really, Jamin, come on. Most people wouldn't really know about the language aspect of it, 99.999% of gamers, for a couple reasons. Mainly because we're in the West, and two, yes, Urdu is the national language of Pakistan, but the Urdu written format is Perso-Arabic. This is very close to Arabic in written forms, and it's pretty understandable if this mistake was actually made by them. Plus, in Pakistan, signs often are actually written in Arabic. One of the reasons for this is because Arabic is the religious language of the worst religion in the world, Islam. With Urdu translations, the Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, and Muslim theology of different kinds is taught in Pakistan in Arabic. And the majority of Pakistan's Muslim population has had some form of formal or informal reading, writing, pronunciation pertaining to Arabic as part of their religious education. It's also taught as a religious language in mosques and universities and schools and colleges and all that. Take all that and factor in the idea that ever since really the 1970s, Pakistan has, for the most part, tried to turn towards Middle Eastern culture and get away from its more Indian roots. Well, mix that all up and you'll get your answer. Plus, again, these things are almost visually indistinguishable from one another, especially if you're Infinity Ward, an American company, making a game where they try to simulate, to at least a degree, being in a Pakistani place like Karachi. And Jamin, you said yourself that the two languages of Pakistan are Urdu and English. Why are the Pakistanis culturally appropriating English? Huh? How come they can do it, but, I'm just fucking around with you.
Every street sign and every piece of dialogue that they recorded for the Karachi map was in Arabic.
And Jamin, let's talk about that dialogue that you showed. That dialogue was not Arabic, Jamin. That dialogue was in German. Now, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, but basically it's Der Feind blockiert unser Radar. The enemy's blocking our radar. That's German, that wasn't Arabic. Not only that, but when you watch over this clip, notice like all the gun sounds and everything aren't there. You took this voice and you dubbed it over the multiplayer gameplay. You didn't get this piece of footage naturally, did you? You took the voice clip that you found, that is in German, and then you put it onto a character who is playing on the Karachi map. And you still got it wrong. You understand this comes across as extremely disingenuous. On the Karachi map, the two factions that are involved in that map are Navy SEALs, they speak English, and OP4, the nationality of which is never explicitly stated and most likely is a sort of a made-up Arab republic for the sake of the game itself. Clues, however, normally seem to converge on the idea that OP4 is a representation of Saudi Arabia in the video games or is based off of Saudi Arabian special forces. And guess which language Saudi Arabia has as its national language? See where I'm going here? It's Arabic, Jamin. And the OP4 factions in the Call of Duty series, they all speak Arabic. So you took a phrase of German, a clip of German, I assume is also found in Call of Duty, and you dubbed it over a section of gameplay where it does not exist on that map, and you called it Arabic, and it wasn't Arabic, and even if it was Arabic, it would actually be correct to the faction that speaks it on the Karachi map. Jamin, what are you doing? Why are you being so disingenuous?
And that wasn't even an isolated incident. Medal of Honor Warfighter did the exact same thing. And
holy shit, Jamin, you're like the only one on the planet who gives a flying fuck about this. I don't care, and 99.9% of people who play these games don't give a fuck. I don't see why I should care at all. And the fact that you're even making this a big deal at all boggles my mind. But I guess, hey, if this is a huge problem to you, then go for it, I guess. I personally don't really care. In fact, bringing it up actually kind of helps to destroy the immersion of these worlds that the developers attempted to create. So, thanks a lot.
the worst part, often games don't even get Arabic right either.
Oh no, that sounds like the worst thing ever.
In many cases, Splinter Cell Conviction's Arabic was just a bunch of squiggly lines.
Well, hey, Jamin, guess what? To someone who doesn't speak Arabic, it is a bunch of squiggly lines. I don't speak French, and so it's a bunch of vowels and letters that are smashed together in inconceivable ways. How is this even a word? How can you pair these letters together? What? What's going on? France, what did you do to these letters? You look at Cyrillic, right? Like the Russian alphabet or Greek. You look at that shit and you're like, what the fuck is that? What's a triangle? That's not a letter, that's a shape. I went to kindergarten. You can't fool me, you sneaky Greeks. Because remember, Jamin, if you can't identify symbols as words or letters, then they're just a bunch of nonsensical shapes. The English alphabet is the exact same thing to somebody who cannot speak or understand English.
Embarrassing as they may be,
Oh yeah, fucking embarrassing as shit. I would be ashamed.
language mix-ups are the least of our problems.
Oh no, it's a huge deal, Jamin.
Native Americans are one of the most stereotyped cultures in all of games.
I sense great change on the wind.
Wait, what was wrong with that? What was wrong with that dude saying I sense great change in the wind? We look at him and we identify with him as a Native American, and he looks to be like some sort of a sage or a wise man, and he's saying something that we can, it's symbolic. He senses change on the wind. Something is coming. He foresees it in his wisdom. I know very little about this man you only played a snippet of, but he seems to be a wise individual. World of Warcraft's Tauren race is absolutely inspired by Native American culture. Is that appropriation? Because it's not specifically one Native American tribe? Or is it not appropriation because they're not people, or because hashtag cow lives matter? I was going to say bull lives matter, but I didn't want to be sexist. As for the picture you show here of this person, I don't know what game this is from, but nothing about this person screams insulting or derogatory. It looks like an old man dressed in what a typical person would associate with Native American garb, telling us that bad shit's gonna happen because he's probably wise and you should listen to him. Maybe your argument that you're making here would make developers not want to put any of these minorities into games because of their being castigated if they get it wrong. And what is up with all this nonsense about you being offended on behalf of someone else?
Everyone knows Custer's revenge is obviously awful, but fewer people think there's a problem when games perpetuate the idea of a single pan-Indian identity, complete with feathers and shaman superpowers.
It's odd that you should make that sentence after you said that Caucasian culture was dominant, implying that there was one pan-identity for Caucasian culture. Jamin, why are you saying it's bad if people imply that there's a pan-Indian identity, but you have no qualms at all in saying that there is a singular dominant Caucasian identity or culture? And if that's the case, are not some Indian cultures more dominant than others? You clearly understand that some cultures can be dominant, either by their prevalence or by their alleged morality compared to the people's ethics based on the zeitgeist, blah, blah, blah buzzwords. So, obviously, some American Indian cultures can be better than others. How do you determine which one is better? And when you put those different identities in your games, how do you show that this is a dominant Native American culture compared to a lesser dominant Native American culture? And now we've started this massive tangle web of who's better than who in point scoring that nobody was thinking about until you decided to say, oh, that's super offensive. Besides, when I take a look at this gentleman here in the video, this Indian gent, is this game implying that this is what all Indians are like, or is it just trying to say this person is an Indian? He is a Native American. And so this is the quickest way to convey this point to you, because the medium especially relies on grabbing your attention, keeping the flow going. You can flash this image up for just a second and anyone instantly says, ah, this gentleman is a Native American. Wasn't that quick and easy? Nobody thinks that this is how all Native Americans dress. Nobody thinks that this is representative of all Native Americans. Hashtag not all, of course. But it is a very easy way to get across someone's, well, at least a facet of who they are. Every once in a while, a kerfuffle pops up where someone says, oh, these names are offensive for a football team. Oh, this icon's offensive for some soccer team or whatnot. And then polls come out and they show that Native Americans aren't offended by things like the Redskins name, because most people view it as a sign of pride. They view it as a sign of something. People don't name their football teams after things they hate or things that they think are awful. We're the Redskins. We're savage. We're strong. We're ferocious. We're brave. We're warriors. We are proud and capable people. That is why this team wants to name themselves after us. At one point, yeah, maybe Redskins was a derogatory term, but that time is not now. No one calls Indians Redskins. They call the football team the Redskins. Redskins, the entire meaning of that word has completely changed into something else. Such things are how culture works, Jamin. And how many of a group must find something offensive before it is unofficially offensive? Is it 1 out of 10, 2, 3, 4? Is it half? Is it the majority? At what point do we say enough people are offended? We have now attached objective metrics to offense and what must be changed. Of course, if people weren't such fucking pussies, this wouldn't be an issue, would it?
Just look at Chief Thunder from Killer Instinct, Nightwolf from Mortal Kombat, and T-Hawk from Street Fighter.
Alright, so what you're saying is that these strong, healthy, powerful, capable individuals, who are in many cases handsome and desirable, because they have aspects of their character design that pulls from Native American culture or a Native American culture that simply isn't specified, they are insulting to Native Americans, is what you're saying. There's a reason, Jamin, that people celebrated when your channel stopped making videos.
When hundreds of unique Native American tribes aren't getting generalized into one pseudo-identity, they're the random scapegoat for whatever mystical crap is happening in a game. I'm looking at you, Beyond Two Souls.
Gotta see what happened.
Yeah, no one's blaming Native Americans for that shit. That's not real, Jamin. That stuff isn't real. And especially when you have a lot of games taking place in North America, it makes sense that if you're going to add a mystical element to it, it would be a mystical element from a culture that lived here. Look at the movie Poltergeist, for instance, where all the spooks and the scares were caused by a house being built on an Indian burial ground. And all of the things that you mentioned are not insulting to Native American cultures, whichever one they may be. And nobody ever watched Poltergeist and said, those goddamn Indians coming out of the TV. No one thinks that. It's silly. It's ridiculous. And have you also considered the impracticality of what you're saying here? If there's what did you say, 600 or whatever, different tribes of Native Americans with their own unique cultures and identities and histories, and remember, all of their cultures took from other cultures around them, and the same thing happened to Native Americans as happened to everyone else on the face of the planet, because humans are humans, and they'll do human things. And cultural appropriation, as you call it, the mixing, the spreading, the taking, the borrowing of one culture by another culture, that happens all the time to Native Americans too. We see influences between Native American cultures, especially the ones within close proximity to one another. And then, of course, we go back into the idea of ownership of a culture. Who do you go to get the official culture of Native Americans? That is a specific tribe. If you want to copy something from the Hopi tribe, for instance, who do you go to? The Navajo, the Anasazi. Who do you go to as an official representative of their culture? Maybe some of them actually do have these people, and if that's the case, if you do something that is maybe impractical to design, or something that's too difficult, or your budget can't meet the constraints of what you're supposed to represent, now you don't have the ability to say, well, we just wanted to represent a general idea, or we wanted to have a character this way, and we were told it's not right, but we had to do it anyway, and now we can't say, oh, we had the best intentions in mind. See what we're doing here? We're making a needlessly complicated mess of developers just wanting to put something in a video game that no one thinks is negative, except for you, Jamin Warren. You know what? I'm part Magyar, alright? My part of my lineage hails from Attila the Hun, back in the old country, in Hungary, right? But whenever I see depictions of Attila the Hun in video games, I don't get my panties in a wad and pound my hands on the chest going, they didn't represent daddy the right way. That would be ridiculous. It's just a video game, and it doesn't mean anything about a culture. And you can look at it however you want and get offended however much or however little you want.
Might, the fighting game that pins gods and goddesses against each other, includes a swath of different cultural figures, which is totally great. Here's the thing though. Today, relatively few people actually worship the god Zeus, but over 1 billion people still worship the Hindu goddess Kali.
I know where this is going, Jamin, and I don't give a flying fuck.
So 1 billion people have the right to get really offended when their sacred religious figure gets turned into a boobified fighting game character.
Now, Jamin, if we were having a face-to-face discussion, and I could do so without vomiting profusely, what I would ask you here would be, who was it exactly that boobified her? Who was it that boobified Kali? Who was that? Was it the developers of Smite? Sledgehammer Games? No, it was not. It was not they who boobified Kali. It was the Hindus. Wasn't it, Jamin? It was the Hindus that boobified Kali. Kali's got great tits. They're fantastic. Round, supple, azure, tinted mammaries. Lovely. But it wasn't I, and it wasn't the West, and it wasn't anyone contemporary who decided they would put boobs on Kali and have them displayed so prominently. In fact, many of these depictions that you will find of Kali, some of which I didn't put in this video because they're a bit risque for YouTube, clad her in barely anything at all compared to the Smite version of her that you see here. She's barely clothed, absolutely, but this is not deviating from the norm and the historic representation of Kali. So, what exactly is the issue? Oh, that's right. This is PBS Game Show, and you're Jamin Warren. It's only bad when the Western people do it. It's only bad when the dominant culture does it. It's only bad, through your implication, when the white people do it. How very interesting it is to pick your brain in this medium. Kali is, after all, the goddess of time, power, creation, destruction, all that good stuff. And don't tell me she's not sexualized. She absolutely is. There are lots of depictions of her having sex with Shiva, for instance. She is indeed a body-positive feminist. So don't come to me with that nonsense about how they boobified her. She was always boobified, Jamin. The pictures that I rolled through a moment ago were, well, some were more contemporary than others, granted, absolutely. But you go as far back as you can, and she's got big old titties. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. I don't believe Kali exists. I don't believe any gods exist, actually. So telling me that it is a matter of offense that you are offended on behalf of a god, what I consider to be an imaginary friend anyway, it just doesn't really hold much spark with me. I mean, you have to prove this thing exists, first off, and good luck doing that. And second, even if it was real, I wouldn't care. Everything can be criticized and made fun of, even deities of destruction. Especially ones who are almost literally wearing a round of applause around their waist. Now, I have done a video about Kali in the past, right? That was a while ago. That was fun. The comments in that are fun. But let's look at Kali. Let's look at really any deity. If you have a character in a video game, as a video game, most of them have fail states. You lose your HP, or you run out of time, or you don't complete an objective with these certain prerequisites being met. You don't fulfill the objectives, You can lose, you can fail. Which means that if you fail, because you are a human being playing as a divine creature in a video game, then you are dishonoring them by not succeeding and not playing perfectly. Especially if you're the goddess of destruction in a game about fighting. If you lose, that is an insult to Kali. If you make her crouch up and down to get her boobs to jiggle, then you are mocking Kali. It's a video game, and video games are played by people, and people are people. So there will be irreverent ways that you can depict this goddess in the game, and it will offend people. So it is impossible to depict a god that you play and that you control in a video game without mocking them, or dishonoring them, or ridiculing them in some way, or taking the piss out of, alright? Which means that it will offend people, because people are super touchy about being offended on behalf of these gods that are so kick-ass they can't defend themselves, I guess. What this means is that you will never be able to play a god in a video game. Smite shouldn't exist at all, because it quite frankly is taking a shit on every single one of the deities. Because first off, the deities, if one of these religions is real, I mean, not all religions are compatible. Maybe some are, I don't know. But all these deities can't exist in the same universe. And of course, one can't beat another, because that means one religion is better than the other, because my God can beat up your God. And then we're just getting into this big spiral of theology where we talk about... Okay, let's reel it back a bit. The point here is that no matter what you do, your depiction of a God, maybe even just by that virtue alone, will offend people. If you can't have things in a video game properly because it offends someone, then you will never see a proper, quote-unquote, proper, decent depiction of a deity in a video game. Which means you can't put them in there. They can't be in video games. You cannot portray deities that people worship in video games. Period. And of course, you can't show favoritism with any of these deities. If one of these imaginary ideas, concepts, deities, whatevers, can't be in the video game because it's disrespectful to the people who think it's disrespectful to the entity, that means all of them have to be taken out. Because you don't want to show favoritism to which imaginary fairy tale you think is best. Because if you take out Kali, then you're like, well, how come fucking Anubis is in it? How come this one's in it? How come that one's in it? And imagine explaining it to a hardcore Hindu that, oh, by the way, in this video game, she was totes OP. We had to nerf her. Explain that to a Hindu. Your god was too powerful in this video game. We had to tone back her abilities a bit. Like, what an interesting conversation that would be. Really imagine that conversation and how that would go to a devout follower, a worshiper of Kali, that you had to nerf her in a video game. It's like, what do you mean you have smacked the great goddess Kali with a bat of nerfs? I'll stop there for fear of being too much of an asshole. What I'm trying to say is that once you decide one deity is too good or too bad or is too holy to be represented in a video game, well shit, now we're on that proverbial slippery slope where now all the deities that people worship, they got to put them on the same pedestal. You got to put them at the same level. You have to take those things and make them unable to be criticized. The holy of holies. I mean, this is shit. Kali's not real, okay? Who fucking gives a shit if people are offended by it?
Just for a little bit of context, can you imagine if we did that with, say, the Virgin Mary?
Now, while I would not have a problem personally with Mary, the Virgin Mary being in Smite, it wouldn't make actually much sense at all. Mary is always depicted, or at least is depicted normally, modestly, covered up. She is pretty, but she is a virgin. She is not sexualized. She is peaceful, she is caring, she is not a goddess of destruction. She is not depicted with severed heads in her arms and a belt made of cut-off hands. She doesn't go around killing demons with scythes and swords and shit. She that completely different. Kali fits into a game like Smite. Kali in mythology, she kicks ass. Mary, not so much. It just wouldn't make any sense to display her in the same way that Kali's being displayed. I mean, again, I wouldn't have any problem with it, but I think that's an odd comparison to make. I mean, Kali's just an obvious fit, and Mary is like the complete opposite of what Kali is.
Of course, this isn't an issue exclusive to games. In fact, Adam Sandler was recently accused of cultural appropriation by Native American extras on the set of his upcoming comedy, Ridiculous Six, offending people this fall.
My Native women were disrespected, and I walked off the set.
Well, what comes to mind originally is that Kali and all these other things in video games are pixels on a screen and they're not real. They possess no actual feelings or force of will or any of that stuff, whereas the extras on the set of an Adam Sandler movie are human beings who have autonomy and can make decisions for themselves. And if they feel offended and they don't like it, then they have every right to walk away from the set and not come back and not support someone who's offending them. That is totally up to them. Also, these women are not taking offense on someone else's behalf, but on their own. They are leaving because they feel offended. They're not making videos telling us about how other people are offended, and so content creators of video games should change their behavior and take video game characters out of video games that they want, because it might hurt the fifis of somebody who worships it. You see the difference?
Appropriating African American culture seems to have been synonymous with being hip for pop stars like Iggy Azalea and Taylor Swift. Not a new thing.
Jamin, African Americans do not own African American culture. Nobody owns African American culture. It's culture. It can be taken and used by anyone at whim, just like any other culture that has ever existed. Plus, if pop stars are doing this and is making them even more popular, one would be led to believe that African American culture is in some way admirable or is attractive to a lot of people, thus why so many people do it. This does not seem to be an indictment of the practice.
But appropriation is fundamentally different when it comes to video games because game worlds are often designed to be conquered by players.
Holy fucking shit. Are you going to go where I think you're going to go here?
We start off as foreigners, but are quickly on our way to become masters of that virtual space. If you want to hear more about that, be sure to check out our episode on the power fantasy. However, the good news is, for as bad as some of these games can be, and yes, they are very bad,
Fuck you, Jamin. There is nothing wrong with that. Where do you get the idea that this aspect of games is bad, where you are dropped off in a foreign location and you become extremely powerful inside of it? How is that a thing? Earlier on you were praising Skyrim, but in Skyrim, are you not an outsider to Skyrim? Are you not someone who goes into Skyrim with nothing to your name? You don't even get a name, really. And then you become a master of it. You kill all the dragons. You become jarls, and you are a well-respected individual, and you can become the leader of all these groups. In Far Cry 4, you go to a foreign land, foreign to the player, the fictional country of Kyrat, and you become a master of the land. You become extremely strong and powerful, and you kill things, and you kill animals, and blah, blah, blah. It's a video game. That shit's fun. But you're saying that just that premise of a video game makes you bad. Just that premise of a video game means the video game is bad. Fallout 4, Fallout 3, those bad games. Skyrim, bad game. Shivering Isles, terrible expansion. I bet you put all those props behind you, Jamin, making people think you're hip and cool and you're really a gamer, because when people listen to you, they say, has this guy ever actually played a video game? Does he not know what fun is?
There are lots of great examples of games being amazing cultural explorations. The recently released Never Alone, for example, captures the stories of the Inupiat, a native Alaskan tribe. Working closely with the elders of that group, the game makers actually managed to preserve their culture and spread it to a global gaming audience. And
Jamin, that has nothing to do with the game being fun. Alright? Its accuracy to a culture, its lack of cultural appropriation, it has nothing to do with whether or not the game is fun. A game should be first and foremost fun. It should be enjoyable. It should elicit enjoyment from you as a player. If it does not do this, it has failed. You should enjoy the time you spend with a video game. And what you are describing has nothing to do with the actual fun or enjoyment you can necessarily derive from the game. Unless you're the kind of person who derives fun from just noticing other cultures are represented properly. I mean, maybe there are people like that. I don't know of any, I don't think. I'm certainly not one of them. Yeah, it's sort of nifty, I suppose, sometimes. But I'm pretty certain if I had a Saudi Arabia simulator or a Life with ISIS simulator that was perfectly accurate to their culture, I wouldn't have that much fun. But to you, I suppose that would be more important, because it's properly representing a culture, and it's not about being fun. Because I guess you don't think video games are about being fun.
of course, there's also Assassin's Creed 3, which, for all of its other faults, went to painstaking lengths to capture the historic Mohawk language and culture, and those opening tutorial sequences with the tribe were some of the best in the whole series.
No, Jamin. I have played many Assassin's Creed games, and number 3 was amongst their number, and it was without a doubt the worst of them all. The tutorial for Assassin's Creed 3 was long, it was boring, it was tedious, it was not fun. It was excessive busy work in every sense of the term. It gave me a negative impression for the rest of the time I could stand to play that game. The tutorial was awful. It was not good because it accurately represented Mohawk culture. I didn't care about that. I cared about having fun in the video game, not getting a National Geographic lesson. It was not the best in the series because it accurately represented Mohawk culture and language. It was the worst because the thing that actually make a game fun and engaging and interesting were not there. They were absent. They had called in sick, and they would not be back until later installments. If I was being charitable, I could say that maybe it was sort of interesting that I was in this environment for a little bit, but again, that's me being very, very charitable. And it didn't matter to me anyway, because if you don't know what proper, real, actual Mohawk culture was or was not, then it doesn't matter if you really see it for real all of a sudden, because what are you going to compare it to? Because to me, it was just another game with Indians in it. Sorry to sound like an asshole if that offends you, but I'm not sorry. I just don't care. That's not something I care about in a video game. It didn't make the game any better, and it was the actual parts of the game that matter that just weren't good. Even though in Jamin Warren's mind, oh, they got Mohawk culture right, they got the language pronunciation right, they got the clothing right, that means it's the best tutorial in the whole series. Fuck Ezio, this is what it's all about. I mean, never mind the lame character that you play as. This is totally the best one, guys.
Keep in mind that cultural differences are not the same as cultural appropriation. You don't have to be from a certain culture to use it in your game, as long as you take your distance from it into consideration. The Scottish creators of GTA, for example, took their natural distance from American culture as an opportunity to satirize it.
Why did you show the title of Grand Theft Auto 5, and then show us Liberty City from Grand Theft Auto 4? And do you not understand how insanely hypocritical you are being here? How come it's okay for someone to satirize a culture in one circumstance, but if they don't satirize the right cultures, it's wrong? Because, remember, the Japanese cannot satirize other cultures. The Japanese can't satirize the Japanese, and the Germans and Indians, they cannot do that, but it's okay for the Scottish to satirize Americans in New York City. Look, Jamin, I'm just getting this vibe here that is recurring, and the vibe is it's okay to do it when you're doing it to white cultures. It's okay to satirize a mostly white New York City. That's okay to do, but God forbid you satirize an Indian, or you satirize a Japanese guy, or a Native American. God forbid you do that. But it's totally okay to make satire out of white American culture, predominantly white American culture. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that.
No New Yorker could have captured the city like GTA 4 did.
It's going to be really weird when I tell you this, but you know the co-founders of Rockstar Games are Sam and Dan Houser, right? Like Sam Houser he's the co-founder and president of Rockstar Games, and he's one of the creative driving forces behind the games in the Grand Theft Auto franchise. In fact, he's been the producer since the third game. You understand he lives in New York, right? Him and his brother, the co-founders of Rockstar, they live in New York. Just putting that out there. The third co-founder, Terry Donovan, he actually left before the full final release of Grand Theft Auto 4. But whatever. Continue. Do continue.
It's a better game because of cultural differences, not in spite of it.
Well, I don't know. The cultural differences between Nico and the people living in America actually create a lot of conflicts, and he does a lot of awful things in that movie. I mean, Nico's not a great guy. Everyone's an asshole for the most part in these universes. But the game wasn't good because of it. It was good because of, well, some people even say it wasn't that good. But, you know, the driving, the gunplay, and the story itself. I mean, there's a lot of things that add to it. And saying it was better because of it may be a little bit of a stretch. I mean, did Niko Bellic, did he properly represent Russian culture or Eastern European culture?
Think of the big picture here. Embracing cultures outside of your own can only add to our overall experience.
Testicular cancer is an experience. You are not better off, though, because you have that experience. Now, I will say that you should learn about other cultures, if for no other reason than to learn that, well, some cultures are shit. And a lot of the times, learning about other cultures will teach you how good a lot of you have it here in the West. Because the West is the best. The more and more I learn about Saudi Arabian or Islamic culture, the more I love my own, for instance. The more I learn about African tribes, the more I love living in my own culture. The more I learn about Native American culture, the more I enjoy my own. It does make you a better person to have knowledge of these cultures, but to assimilate them just because they are different will not necessarily make you better. In many ways, they will make you worse. And in many ways, for video games, they will not necessarily make the video game better.
Because play is one of those activities that transcends all our differences, video games are primed for being a particularly universal type of entertainment. The Witcher 3, for example, is a distinctly Polish game, with Polish creators who take a deep dive into their culture's ancient and fascinating lore. Yet The Witcher 3 can be enjoyed by anyone, whether it's an audience in Europe, America, Asia, South America, wherever.
Even though in another video that I have done a response on, that many of you will remember, you are very specifically sympathetic to people who say that The Witcher 3 should be more pro-diversity and more inclusive to people of different skin colors. So which is it, Jamin? Which is it? I guess it depends which video you're doing. And once again, Jamin, I have to ask you, why can't you just let developers make the games they want to make, and if you don't like them, you don't have to play them because no one's forcing you to? The fact it is of Polish culture is a reason that everyone can focus on it, right? Not because they go with what you want and co-opt the creative vision of CD Projekt Red, the developers and publishers of the game, so that it can be inclusive and diverse like you want it to be.
And Naveed Kansari, an Iranian designer for Grand Theft Auto, discovered in his home country teenagers weren't excited about his games for the guns or the missions. Since most American music is banned in their country, Iranian players were excited to just cruise around in a hot ride and listen to the radio. A true American experience, am I right?
See, you just learned more about hardcore Islamic Saudi Arabian culture, and don't you feel glad that you live in a country where songs aren't banned? Where, well, one that isn't shit.
Games are amazing at communicating a sense of place. Imagine what they could do if creators put the same level of detail into recreating foreign countries and cultures as they do in creating fantastical ones.
Alright, I'm closing my eyes right now, and I'm imagining this world. And I, for the life of me, do not know what the differences would be. I'm thinking about a world where they do that, and what would the difference be? So? What would the differences be? I mean, if it means we get more tutorial missions from Assassin's Creed 3, then I'm extremely against the idea. And if the most that changes is the street signs and Pakistan maps are proper, then it seems like a waste of time.
Let's Players could become like the Anthony Bourdains of virtual worlds.
How do you play this game?
Or Anthony Bourdain could be Anthony Bourdain, and developers could make the video games that they want to make, and not pander towards being National Geographic exposés that are a little bit more interactive than the magazines. Plus, that means that the Let's Players would also have to assume an education on certain particular matters, which would really not give them any useful qualifications for the rest of their lives, just to make content that they already made and that people liked anyway.
With the advent of virtual reality, I'm hopeful that games will make players something of a virtual citizen of the world.
There's no such thing as a citizen of the world. We have sovereign nations, and thank God we do.
Experiencing parts of the Earth that they'd otherwise never get to see. So what do you think? Are game designers getting better or worse at representing cultures that are different from their own?
I know this may make me seem like an apathetic piece of shit, but I honestly don't really care. I really don't. I like to see things satirized and made fun of and poked fun of and prodded. I like to see different environments, and I don't want to have that constrained by the fact that developers are being pressured to portray real cultures in the proper way, in the realistic and authentic version of what they really are. If anything, it creates an impediment, a stumbling block, a series of extra steps for developers to portray another culture instead of just doing it themselves and getting it mostly right, or at least aesthetically correct.
Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week.
We are approaching the end of this, what is now an hour-long video, in which I get long-winded because this is a topic that I care about. I care about it because video games are a hobby of mine, and I think that they are more important to people than what just appears on the surface in a lot of ways. Some people feel the same way about sports. They are passionate about sports. Some people feel the exact same thing about art. Art is not easy to do, despite what certain StarCraft 2 streamers might tell you. Artistry is integral to humanity and to civilization. And I know that might sound a little hyperbolic when talking about video games, but I promise you that to the people who slave over a computer screen for hours and hours, for days, for weeks, months, for years, it is not a trivial thing. It's easy to look at someone making a video game and say, oh, he's just making a video game. It is very difficult for somebody making a video game, I imagine, to say, oh, I'm just making a video game. In the same way that it might be very easy to point at somebody else's YouTube channel and say, oh, they're just making videos on the internet. I promise you, to the content creator, that might be very different from their own perspective. It's a work of creativity, something that they put their heart, soul, and sweat, blood, and tears into. This is the second time I've come across a Jamin Warren video from the PBS Game Show that I've responded to directly. The second video where the real victim, to me, seems to be the creative freedoms of those who create the games. This kind of attitude can have the real negative impact of forcing developers to not create the kinds of things that they truly want, where they will have to water down, or they will have to change or modify, or make compromises just on the things they want to portray and show and create, because of a narrative that says, if you do it wrong, you're offending somebody, you're hurting someone's feelings, or there are people out there who have to see their own skin color, because that's just how some people are. Now change yourself, for me, and for them. Did you know that recently the Stanford University TAPS performance of Shakespeare's The Tempest was accused of being white supremacist because it did not portray negatively enough the message of post-colonialism? Not even just having a play by Shakespeare. Not even that is safe. Shakespeare should have wrote a different play, and you must change it on his behalf. You must change a Shakespearean production. You must change your video game. You must change your story, you must alter your characters, you must include where there was originally nothing, and you must take away where there was originally something. I do not believe these kinds of people are winning this little culture war, if you can call it that. I do not think they will win. The outcry is too strong. The voices like mine are too many. They are too popular. They are too loud and vocal. I think, though, it is important for all of us to fight the proverbial good fight. For creative freedom. Not necessarily for things that we agree with, or things that we like, or things that we personally prefer, but for the freedom for people to create the things that they want, whether we personally like it or not. This is of the utmost, paramount importance. Like I said earlier, there is a reason that there was such an outcry of wonderment and happiness when this channel stopped producing content. This video is an example of why, Jamin. Gamers are not buying your social justice bullshit. This video was about cultural appropriation, something I believe for all intents and purposes is definitely not negative, if it even exists in this sense at all. What's shocking to me is that how something that should be considered good, like taking things from other cultures because you admire them or because you respect them, how that could be turned into a bad thing, and how throughout this video, the prevailing constant seems to be, it's okay when it's done to white culture, or predominantly white culture. You are the one who makes that white culture into a monolith while saying it's bad when it's done to Indian cultures or something of that nature. The way that you edited this video, as I pointed out, was disingenuous in ways, and look, I mean, the backdrop that you stand in front of makes me think that they're trying to give this impression that you play video games and you know a lot about them, but then you open your mouth and that idea goes out the window. You have an agenda, you're trying to push a narrative, people aren't buying it, myself included. As one comment on your video says, I think it's a bit unreasonable to expect designers to spend time and money to correctly represent cultures that are being used to facilitate story rather than to directly drive it in many aspects. I think I've said enough on the subject, so I'll catch you guys later. Thanks for watching during this long-ass video, and I'll have more stuff coming out soon.